Mike Casey is an entrepreneur and cherry orchardist from Central Otago who has electrified every machine on his farm.
When you sell your business, you kind of divorce your identity. All of a sudden, I wasn't Mike from Grad Connection anymore. I wasn't Mike in the city startup scene anymore. I was just Mike with a reasonably large bank account. And it was actually quite a bit of an identity crisis.
He's also the CEO of Rewiring Aotearoa, a charity dedicated to electrifying millions of fossil fuel machines across the country as quickly as possible.
Climate action is no longer a cost. Climate action is profitable. Weaning our way off foreign energy onto clean New Zealand-made energy, and that's kind of what I live for.
Someone might be thinking, well, I'm not that person. I'm just a person who is struggling and there's a lot of work that I'm trying to do. I'm not that fortunate. What would you say to them?
I see you and I hear you, and I was you until I was 33 years old. When you're truly working to a purpose, your energy is unlimited. And the moment that you are not working to a purpose, well, then it's just willpower, and willpower gets exhausted with time.
And Mike won this year's 2026 Kiwibank New Zealander of the Year for Sustainability. If you're enjoying this episode of Care Beyond Profits, please like, share and subscribe below. It's free and it's the best way that you can support me in bringing more inspiring stories of leaders who care beyond profits. Let's get into it. Mike, thank you so much for joining me on Care Beyond Profits today.
Kia ora and tēnā koutou to all your wonderful listeners.
Thank you. And I think it's fair to say that before we started planning for this episode and now, you've ended up getting a very special award. So I think we should start from there. Not everybody gets an award in the same year that I speak to, which is quite special. So congratulations on the New Zealander of the Year award.
It was just an amazing experience. I had my mum, my dad, my wife, my eldest daughter, all in the room, along with a bunch of my team from Rewiring Aotearoa. And obviously, to win an award with mana like that was pretty special. I'm not going to lie. Obviously very, very grateful for not only those that nominated me, but also the judges for, picking me out of the pack, I guess. It's pretty awesome. Pretty chuffed.
I also think it's not very often that we get to meet such people, so I'm very honoured that you're here today. So thank you for joining me. And I wanted to start off with not your orchard, not all the stuff that we're going to get into today, but who you were before all of this, because not all of life's successes comes to us in one blink, and we all know that. There's a lot behind that. So if you were to describe yourself behind all your mahi, how would you describe yourself?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, because I feel in this case, my existing mahi is rather tightly coupled to my identity. But I was a suburban Wellington boy, a reasonably good childhood, not a rich childhood, but a safe and loving childhood that allowed me to, I guess, excel at high school and then excel at university. Quickly gave me the privileged position to be able to head to Sydney and build a technology startup over there, which was quite successful. And selling that led to the orchard and then the mahi that we currently do around electrifying New Zealand through Rewiring Aotearoa. But if you were to sum it all up, just a regular Wellington guy that cares deeply about climate in our country and wants to use the skills that he's learned to further and better those outcomes. And I feel like at the moment we're kind of achieving that, which is cool.
Behind all of that, it seems like there was a thread all along. So obviously you didn't wake up one day and start caring about climate. So at what point did this kick in for you personally?
I think the frustration for me was seeing all the narrative out there around climate. And it was very doom and gloom, very culture of sacrifice. We need to consume less. We need to do less. We need to really downgrade our lifestyles in order to save the planet. And I think, to some extent, the messaging, well, the intent behind the messaging was really good. But what was super frustrating for me was just how all my friends, normal, rational New Zealanders and Australians at the time, would just reject it because it was just not a story that they wanted to believe, right? Because it just came with all of these downgrades and lifestyles. And so I really wanted to create a new narrative around how we can actually, live better lives from also being, acting on climate. And that's sort of how it all started. That's why when we moved back to New Zealand and my wife Rebecca and I decided to get into a cherry orchard, we decided that we were going to do things differently and try and essentially do it without the use of imported fossil fuels from overseas and run it on energy that we can create ourselves and tell the story behind doing that, because storytelling is one of the best ways to get outcomes. And having that be very, very successful and actually more economically successful than we thought it was going to be, and then being able to share that with people to sort of create that contagious change in the way that we go about doing things, I think has been really, really exciting. So it has been a long time in the process, but I think probably more motivated by the frustration that the climate movement wasn't getting where it needed to get to with the mainstream population, I think is where I really thought I could step in and maybe make a little bit of a difference.
As you were growing up in your own life, if I took it all the way back to your childhood, was there a thread in your own family, with your parents, your extended family, anything that you remember that sort of shaped any of this narrative for you? What was it like?
No, not really. So prior to, I think, selling my business and really turning my attention towards climate, my life was very much based around entrepreneurship. So a lot of what my father did, he was a entrepreneur in Wellington that built a couple of technology startups, again, one which was moderately successful that he's now sold, and it's given him and my stepmom a really good lifestyle over in the Wairarapa. But before that, it was all about entrepreneurship. It was all about, how do I build something on the smell of an oily rag? How do I do it with very, very limited resources, but add the maximum amount of value possible? And what ended up happening for me was building a website for university students that were looking for their first job, because I was a university student. Moved to Australia with my co-founders and started building that out, and it got really successful. So over 12 years, it ended up being something that 4 out of 5 university students in Australia used to find their first job. It wasn't solving a climate problem, but it was certainly solving an information gap for students around applying for the right companies that they felt like they wanted to work for. So very entrepreneurial focused, very not letting the status quo, not wanting to walk down the same path as many others, not really wanting to have a job. I think that was where you could say it was almost a blatant disrespect for authority for a long time, and maybe that's still the case with climate, trying to make sure that we do things in a different way for better outcomes.
You talked a little bit about your dad and your family side of having that entrepreneurial spirit. What was your mum like, and what did you have cousins, siblings? What was that part like?
Mum's very, very nurturing, not an entrepreneurial bone in her body, but very nurturing. And one of the things that I think part of what I'm very, very passionate about is coming together as New Zealanders and figuring out the 80% that we do have in common, rather than focusing on maybe the 20% that we don't have in common when it comes to our political beliefs or our religious beliefs or whatever it might be. And, ultimately, my dad was an ACT Party candidate for the Wairarapa, and my mum's been a big supporter of the Green Party for a long time. And so the joke I often tell at conferences is, you can see why they're now happily remarried, but they married great people, right? Like, I've got a stepmom and a stepdad who are great, assets to me, and made big contributions to my life. So that's fantastic. The point is, they're both fully electric parents. And so, when it comes to my mum, she's not really, she doesn't have an entrepreneurial bone in her body. She did the much more classical of going and working in a job in Wellington and working her way up through, I guess, the hierarchy of Wellington, and then retiring, in her mid-60s, but provided me with a very loving childhood, gave me all the resources that she could afford at the time. Obviously, coming from, she was a single mum for a long time. Dad was a single dad for a long time. So there were those struggles that went on during that process. But ultimately, I look back on it now, there's not a lot of trauma in my life, in my childhood. There wasn't a huge level of privilege, but it was comfortable, which I think a lot of people in New Zealand would argue is privilege, and ultimately allowed me to do what I wanted to do in life. So I think between the two of them, they did a pretty good job of raising me, in all honesty.
And it's not an easy task being a single mother, or a single father, in fact. And I think sometimes when we reflect back in life, we don't really see it a lot later down the path, how our early days shaped us, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, like, when you look at my stepfather and my stepmother, they're so much better suited for my mum and dad. Like it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I'm just really happy that my mum and dad made a mistake by, getting married when they did and having me and having my younger sister, because ultimately we exist. And so that mistake was important, but afterwards they are much happier. And I think as a result, myself and my sister are much happier as well.
And right now for you, talk us through what does family look like right now at?
So I have my wife, Rebecca, who I met in the final year of university. I was 20, she was 21. I'm now 42, she's now 44. So we have been together for an awful long time. And I think one of the amazing things about Rebecca is while I was figuring out how to be an entrepreneur, there was not a lot of income coming in from my side. And in our early 20s, she supported me for the first few years of building our business. On the other side of that now, she's supporting me, and I'm supporting her with the growth of our orchard here in New Zealand, which is something I think we're both incredibly proud of. But going back to your question, I mean, we've got 3 children at home. My Tamu, my eldest, Connie, she's 13. We've got a little boy who's 7. And then our youngest, little Nora, is 3 years old. And so, yeah, a lot of it when I'm home is involved with getting them off to school, all of those kinds of things, running around like a maniac, doing all the, after school activities and doing a lot of skiing on the weekends as well. That's something that my kids are all super passionate about, which is fun. Yeah, so that's kind of that. And then, of course, with the role that I do as CEO of Rewiring Aotearoa, there's huge amounts of travel involved, a lot. So I can't, for a second, really underrepresent the amount of work that Rebecca does to keep this family together. And that family is definitely the building block for me to be able to achieve, what I am achieving at the moment. And always be very, very grateful for that.
And I can totally relate to the juggle with 2 little ones myself. And especially when it comes to juggling a business alongside that, I think the work that you both do is just absolutely amazing. I can't wait to get into some of those details. In terms of when you started this mission, you talked about selling off your business from Sydney and moving back. Talk us through what did that look like? Because not everybody makes a big business sales and then decides to go off on a cause that they love so much. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of expenses attached to your own family by doing that as well. So talk us through, your thinking, decision-making process, and then how you're where you are today.
Yeah, it was not as preconceived or planned as what one often thinks it was. When you're an entrepreneur and you've been building a business for 10 plus years, you're in this scenario where all your chips are kind of in the middle of the table. And you kind of feel like a bit trapped. Entrepreneurship is meant to be about freedom and doing what you want to do, but ultimately you're a bit trapped when you've got all this value that you've built over the time, but there's no way to get out of the game of poker. There's no way to leave or cash out. All your chips are there. And it was very, very fortunate in 2018, really, that an acquirer came along that wanted to purchase the startup that we'd spent 10, 12 years making. But also, in all honesty, I fell out of love with it about 5 years before we sold it, right? I was no longer a student who wanted to do that. Wasn't my purpose anymore. And so at the start, when we built the business, I was heavily purpose aligned to it, and it was just very energizing. By the time I was in my early 30s, I was no longer a university student in their early 20s looking for a job. My friends weren't in that phase of life anymore, and so it really became more of a transactional thing than it was purpose driven. So selling that was awesome, and we knew that we wanted to move back home to Aotearoa, New Zealand. We went over to Sydney thinking that we'd stay there for a number of years. After 12 years there, with two of our 3 young children, it was really time for us to come home. And that's ultimately the sale of the business gave us the fortuitous opportunity to close one chapter and open another and start writing a new one. Moved back to New Zealand, no idea what we wanted to do. When you sell your business, you kind of divorce your identity. All of a sudden, I wasn't Mike from Grad Connection anymore. I wasn't Mike in the city startup scene anymore. I was just Mike with a reasonably large bank account. And it was actually quite in a bit of an identity crisis. So moving back to New Zealand and moving to Central Otago, where we wanted to live, buying a farm because it was cheaper than a home in Wanaka, 30 minutes south of Wanaka, like the perfect home and 9 hectares of land for the same price. I was just like, this is nuts. And Rebecca, who's an accountant, just loves bargains. And so all of a sudden we had this land. And then with this land, it's like, well, what are we going to do with this land? Ended up deciding through, looking around at what the best things to do with this land were, that would plant 9,300 cherry trees. And then began the journey of, okay, why are we doing this on energy that we import from overseas when we could be doing this off energy that we can create ourselves right here in New Zealand? Machine after machine after machine, 21 years later, sorry, not 21 years later, 21 machines later, and we are, and we had a fully electric orchard that has catapulted us to even bigger things. So that is essentially the story of how it all started. And I'd love to say that it was planned. I think I'd sound way smarter if I said it was planned, but it honestly wasn't. And even into the next year or two, I don't really know what's going to happen. We will see.
That is quite amazing, because I think a lot of startups think that, once they do get started, a lot of the messaging around the business planning side often feels a bit, people start, but then I've noticed that it's not always going to plan, and people are worried that if they shift, it's actually not going to look good on them. What's the image going to look like? But what you've actually proven is actually you can just get started, and along the way you can adjust, and obviously making very good, sound financial decisions. But you've got somewhere where most people probably dream of getting to, right?
I think it comes down to being purpose driven. Like, I think when you're doing things that align very close to your purpose and acknowledging that your purpose will change over time. My purpose is a lot different when I was in my early 20s to what it is now in my early 40s, but your purpose changes. And as long as you're being true and authentic to that purpose, whatever it might be, ultimately you live a very rewarding life doing the mahi that you are doing, right? And I just feel this whole time moving back to New Zealand, getting into farming, getting into electrification, it is all really, really purpose driven. And that's what I would encourage people when it comes to things like pivots or changes of directions, is to care less about maybe the reputational risk and more about the purpose risk. Because when you're truly working to a purpose, your energy is unlimited. And the moment that you are not working to a purpose, well, then it's just willpower, and willpower gets exhausted with time.
Absolutely. And you bring it to a really good point, which was going to be my next question, actually. In terms of where you see purpose and profit, along the way, you've obviously had to make those decisions. You talked about 21 electric units, right? That you've machines. So obviously when you first did the maths behind it, talk us through what did that look like, and then how did you stick with your purpose along the way? Because I'm sure on your journey of starting, there would have been a lot of farmers around you, right? And then you would have had other perspectives come into this as well. So talk us through, what were you battling with? What did that look like? And how did you stick to what you wanted to achieve this?
Yeah, I think like in my early 20s, when I was starting my first startup, my purpose was very aligned to profit, being successful. There was probably a lot more egocentricity to it compared to what it's like now. And interestingly enough, my profile has never been bigger the moment that I gave up caring about it. Like, it's kind of strange how that works out. But yeah, like when I sold my business, I think there was a platform to be very, very purpose driven. I think I was purpose driven in previously in the business, when like the whole reason for starting this business was finding frustrations about missing out on graduate roles when I graduated from university, and then wanting to build something better for students. And then that purpose slowly fizzled out because I got older and I was no longer a student, didn't really care so much about that purpose. And so a lot of it became much more money orientated. And that was actually really self-consuming, like being in a business that you'd fallen out of love with, that would no longer really align to a true purpose. And it was just about, well, I've got to keep going at this until we somehow realize the financial success from it. And then, of course, once that got converted into a bank account, there was a bit of an identity crisis that went on, but ultimately it made me shift back into doing things that were really purposeful. And for me, moving into farming was something that I don't know what it was. I don't know how it happened, but I was always really fascinated with farming ever since I was a little boy. And so the ability, all of a sudden we bought this land, and I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Like, I have this land to realize this kind of childhood passion of mine that I'd never really had the chance to let out, little Mike, the inner child, all of a sudden was like, well, let's build a farm. Like this is what I've always wanted to do. And of course, it wasn't the farm that I dreamed of. It wasn't the sheep and beef station, with the huge amounts of land and the sheep shearing sheds and all this kind of thing that I think most people think about when they think of farming in New Zealand. It was 9,300 cherry trees, but it's still farming. So switching that and being really proud of that moment was really cool. And then moving into like the electric machine stuff, that was just when I started planting cherry trees, we're literally standing on the shoulders of giants of other cherry farmers in New Zealand. And we took a lot of time to make sure that we really learned from them. And ultimately, I credit a lot of the success in the cherry game down to my neighbors who are, some of my best mates now, who are all cherry growers from this region. And they taught us how to grow really good cherries. I have a high school friend of mine. His name is Ewan, who is now my business partner. He came in and he runs a lot of the orchard as well. So he's like the orchard manager, essentially, while I go off gallivanting about all this electrification, topics around New Zealand. He's the one that really does most of the farming now, but we've got a really tight-knit, team that grows some of the best cherries in New Zealand, and New Zealand grows the best cherries in the Southern Hemisphere, which means for a certain time of year, they're the best cherries in the world. And so that was super cool and exciting to have beyond that purpose. Bringing in the electrification stuff was fun and exciting. It was my contribution that I could make to the industry. They were telling us how to grow good cherries, and I was here going, well, I've come from a technology background. Why don't I see about bringing some of this technology in? And I had a big enough bank account that I was willing to take some risks that other farmers were not just able to make. So importing electric tractors, electric frost fighting fans, converting the irrigation over to electric and running it off solar, all of these kinds of things were things that we could add to the industry. And I'm really proud of that moment because we get a lot of cherry farmers, but then a lot of other farmers coming to see what we've done on farm and adopting what we've learned into their farming practices and to help them be more successful and make more money. So that's a super proud moment as well. And that was really being like, well, I'm a farmer now. How do I be more purposeful with my farming? How do I give back to the community that's already given so much to me by teaching me how to grow cherries? How do I add value? And then when I realized on the other side of this, how much of an economic slam dunk this truly was, and it was something that I think took me and Rebecca by complete surprise, was how much money we saved from going electric. It was mental. And that's when the climate thing kicked in a big way as well, of being like, okay, I'm over here and I'm still a little bit frustrated that the climate stuff isn't really getting the traction that it needs to get. No one really seems to care. Holy hell, look over here. This is climate action is no longer a cost. Climate action is profitable. So then that's what led to Rewiring Aotearoa, is how can we tell a story that's a uniquely positive and really positive for New Zealand and our future economic prosperity by weaning our way off foreign energy onto clean New Zealand made energy. And that's kind of what I live for. That's my daily kaupapa at the moment, which ultimately led to the Kiwibank New Zealander of the Year for the Sustainability Section award, something I'm very, very proud of.
Congratulations. And yeah, I think that you touched on so many aspects of the profit and purpose coming together there. And some of it looks like you started off genuinely wanting to make a difference. And from that, one thing has led to another that actually led to a better outcome in the end, which is the positive story that we all want to see and hear. Another thing that I'm really curious about in the story that you talked about is looking at the numbers and being very pleasantly surprised. Obviously, as a numbers person myself, I'm always, asked that question from others, and I'm always also encouraging people to actually look at your numbers in a different way and look at it as what's your contribution. So can you just tell us, doesn't have to be exact, but just rough numbers in terms of, percentages that you've saved? What did that look like? And what was that aha moment for you?
So 21 machines, buying fully electric machines rather than diesel machines. We spent about $400,000 more on capital. And at the time, I could obviously afford to do that, having the sale of my company previously. But it was interesting to note that a lot of the banks didn't really want to know about it because it was seen as overcapitalizing on a cherry farm, which is a reasonably risky farming proposition. The interesting thing is spending $400,000 a year additional, $400,000 additional saved me about $33,000 a year in energy costs. Right now, when you add in the cost of finance and all the other bits and bobs, it was really interesting to see the payback, the complete capital return on investment plus interest was sitting at, I don't know, 13 years, something like that, on machines that I expect to last about 15 years. So I was like, okay, this is really interesting. Like, I can afford to do it. It's obviously the right decision for me to make. And some machines were a slam dunk immediately. Others, like the electric tractor, they were on the bleeding edge of technology. They were substantially more expensive. They kind of pushed the average out a lot. But going fully electric was a bit of a narrative that I wanted to invest in. I guess was that narrative. But then, interestingly enough, came this new thing, which is if I'm now running on electricity and I'm saving $33,000 running a year running off New Zealand-based electricity, well, can I generate this energy myself? And this was, I think, like 2021, we put our first solar installation in, and we more than halved our electricity bill. And I was like, wow, this has got like a payback of 10 years, 12 years when you include the cost of finance. This is also a good investment because these solar panels are going to last for 25 years. I plan to, this is my forever home now. This is our forever farm. So we will keep, this is obviously a good decision to make. But then, like, we save half the power bill. And I often say this joke to farmers. It's like, have you ever built a shed before? Because if you built that shed, you immediately regret not building a bigger shed. And the same thing applies to solar. So we went really big on the next solar installation because the prices continued to come down. The prices of electricity from the grid continued to go up. And the prices, obviously, from diesel and petrol were going up by significant amounts more than that. And so when we built the second system, it was like $120,000 of capital to create $33,000 of electricity a year or something to that effect. Like, it was absolutely mental how much money I could make just by pointing panels at the sun. And all in all, when you add it up, it's like converting a $50,000 a year diesel bill into a $25,000 revenue stream on my farm, with an average payback period, including the cost of interest, of probably 9 years. And that shows you just how powerful this stuff is. And that's all I needed to do to other farmers is say to them, you don't have to go fully electric. I've gone fully electric to prove the point. But you don't need to go fully electric here. You don't have to go to San Francisco to acquire an electric tractor, but you've already got this large electricity bill because of your dairy shed and because of your irrigation pivot. And you've already got these cars that you drive on the road that could be electric that are costing you way too much money because they're diesel and they're expensive. So why don't you just start doing things piece by piece? Because this is clearly the right economic way to go. And you just see farmers all over New Zealand now just adopting it piece by piece. The solar going in on farms is incredible. The number of electric utes now that are coming through is incredible. And farmers realizing that they can play a significant role in the future energy system of New Zealand is a really positive story in a world where the climate story has always been massively negative towards them. So again, it's just reframing things in a way that is going to work. And so that's the numbers. And when you look at it at like a household level, electrifying all the machines in your home, including your car, putting some solar panels on the roof, it's like $7,000 a year of energy savings for the household, which is millions of dollars for communities and billions of dollars for the country. And when you tell it like that, why are we not acting on climate faster?
And most of the work that you do, you publish everything in terms of the numbers, your mistakes. You've been sharing, pretty much the whole playbook for anyone listening. Do you sometimes, when you started this process, did you think you were going to be starting to give away so much information? And for people that are looking at it and thinking this is a lot of information, what do you have to say to them?
Well, this is where it got really interesting for me. Is I'm not particularly good at structuring that information, doing these calculations. Rebecca, who's an accountant, was pretty good at doing some of these things. But really, this led me to start the charity Rewiring Aotearoa, where we got significant amounts of philanthropic funding from some very generous and wealthy New Zealanders to be able to articulate and tell the story properly to everybody else. So my farm is one example, but the households of New Zealand are another example. The businesses of New Zealand are another example. And there's a really powerful, like, New Zealand made energy story that makes it so exciting to be a New Zealander right now. And I essentially raised the money to pay people well, to take them out of the system and work on the system to create the right policy, the right system settings, the right narrative for New Zealand to be a world leader on climate. And that's essentially probably my proudest moment to date. Is there's millions of dollars a year that we have raised to put towards climate at a time where climate charities were not doing particularly well, and the narrative, had largely shifted and has continued to shift. On this podcast, I'm talking a lot about emissions, but in general, I'm talking about money. With the New Zealand public, I'm talking about money and efficiency and how we are way better off running on New Zealand made energy than energy sourced from the other side of the world. And I think the Middle Eastern war and conflict that's going on at the moment, has really helped to accelerate this. One of my favorite sayings in entrepreneurship is fortune favors the brave. And I think what's happened now is right place, right time. We have a war that's causing all sorts of issues for a lot of people. And I want to pay my respects to all those people that are struggling right now with the cost of energy. But we will see a better New Zealand as a result of this. And so if we can focus on that, and we can focus on policy and regulation to get New Zealand moving forward with New Zealand made energy, electrifying the 10 million fossil fuel machines in New Zealand, God, it's an exciting future. And that's what we have to focus on, right? If we're going to be a happy population.
Yeah, and it's really exciting. And I love this point that you brought it down to, because for most of the listeners that tune in, you're not going to all have a farm. You're probably going to have a business that you're running. And so let's go back to the basics, because everyone has a house. Either they're renting or they're from the landlord. So say you're just an ordinary New Zealander, and we all know that obviously the most important thing here is probably your car. So let's start with that, and then let's talk about some of the shifts that just a normal individual can do and start thinking about.
Yeah, if we do look at the car, first of all, the first thing we must acknowledge is that New Zealanders don't buy new cars, right? There's only about 150,000 new cars bought into New Zealand every year, and we have 4.3 million cars in New Zealand. So a lot of cars, and most of those cars, a lot of those cars are obviously secondhand cars imported from overseas. So it's one of New Zealand's wicked problems how we solve this, because our economy will be so much better if we can electrify the car fleet, because the energy that goes into the existing cars is really, really expensive. But the upfront capital cost of new vehicles and electric vehicles is well beyond the reach of a lot of New Zealanders. And so this is part of the change that we are trying to seek. I do have sympathies, and some of your listeners might not like this, but I do have sympathies to the current government's stance on the clean car discount, right? It was a subsidy that went to people that may already have been able to afford electric vehicles. And was that the right thing to do, or the best way to spend taxpayers' money? I do have sympathy to thinking that's probably not the most efficient way to increase the equity of New Zealand here. If you're focused purely on emissions, great. But I'm not focusing purely on emissions. I'm focusing on lowering people's energy bills. And so there is a new scheme that we're developing at the moment that we're hoping that will have pickup at this election from both sides of the House, because that's something that I really fight for, is making sure all politicians ultimately agree that the stuff that we want done is the right thing, because that's how New Zealanders win. But what it allows people to do is lease cars through their employer. This is brand new cars for probably around about $200 a week that will pay for the energy, the maintenance, the insurance, and the car. But instead of it coming off your normal pay packet, it comes off your gross pay packet. So it comes off pre-tax. And we're going to call it the EV salary boost. In Australia, it's called salary sacrificing, for the accountants in the room that might know what that is. Ultimately, it's a way that we can get nurses, we can get teachers, we can get essential workers into brand new vehicles in a way that they can actually afford them. And in many cases, these teachers or nurses, they might be going to a car loan company and paying ridiculous interest on a 2018 Corolla. And then they have to pay for the petrol that goes into that Corolla. And especially in rural New Zealand, where they drive a lot of Ks, all those home healthcare workers that are driving all over the place, the amount of money involved with just doing your job is horrific. So being able to get people into these cars for $200 a week is actually a really, really good alternative. So that's sort of what I'm super excited about. Along with things, like there's 150,000 cars that come into New Zealand. 60% of those cars will go into businesses. How do we make sure businesses go electric? There's a lot of business policy we can do around depreciation, around fringe benefits, tax exemptions, and things like that ultimately mean that more of the new cars coming into New Zealand are electric. And those electric vehicles ultimately seed the secondhand market after a few years. So more and more New Zealanders can get access to buy those vehicles. So that's something that I'm really focused on. And when it comes to, electric vehicles, for example, and, there is a strong argument, of course, that the best car is no car. But then there's also a strong argument that New Zealanders want cars. And so we have to be really pragmatic here around, yes, there's other forms of mode shift and transport that we can look at doing, but ultimately it's the New Zealanders' choice whether they buy a car or not. And if they buy a car, we need that car to be electric. So that's a super important part of what we're kind of looking to achieve, I guess. And yeah, there's some other benefits that come from the electrification of vehicles as well, like the fact that those batteries will one day be able to power our homes, which makes us more resilient. So there's a lot of positive outcomes from doing this.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, what was your first electric car and when did you start driving it?
So it was 2021 or 2022. It was whenever the clean car discount was announced. And I was sitting there at the time going, wow, Jacinda's going to give me $8,000 to buy an electric vehicle and I don't have to pay road user charges on it. It's like they're giving you a subsidy to not pay tax on something. To me, being a little bit of a capitalist at heart, I think that really tickled my fancy. So we got two of these little Hyundai Konas that are still going. One of them's got 160,000 Ks on it. And there's been no noticeable degradation in its battery or anything like that. Like the technology has just come so far. I'm going to have probably a 250,000 K party for that car when it happens. Yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I've personally banked on that one after that came through as well, and ended up. I've started off with a 2009 Leaf, and then every time upgraded, and I've actually stuck with the Leaf ever since. But when this particular law came out, it was just a bit too good to say no to. Yeah,
exactly.
So,
And again, it's like to acknowledge that we were people that could afford to take advantage of that subsidy.
exactly.
And of course, what's
Yeah.
happened since then is the cars have got way better and the prices got so much cheaper that realistically we don't really need that subsidy. But what we did see was that subsidy created a huge level of demand. It seems like consumers, New Zealanders, we're very fickle people. It's like, oh, if someone's going to give me $8,000, there's a fear of missing out. I must go buy an $80,000 electric vehicle or a $60,000 electric vehicle. Now the same vehicle, brand new is $40,000.
Exactly. It depreciates pretty fast, hey?
Yeah, but no one was buying them, of course, because the everything was fine. But then the Iranian war kicked off, and now everyone's buying electric vehicles again. It's like 1 in 4 new vehicles coming into New Zealand are electric. So pretty powerful.
Let's talk a little bit more about, we've covered a little bit around the finance side of things. We've covered your personal journey. I want to bring this back home to a little bit more about your own personal, I guess, way that you're operating, because obviously juggling all of this alongside a business as well as a family and a mission that you're on is not going to be easy. So the first one that I have for you, I guess, is from your own personal things. You talk a lot about energy, but where do you get your personal energy from?
Oh, so the personal energy definitely comes from purpose. And I've always been I don't know, just a very, very, very energetic person. But I think the only way that I've been able to capitalize on that energy and that purpose to live a very purposeful life is a direct result of my wife, Rebecca, and what she is able to do on the other side with both the cherry farm as well as our family when I'm traveling lots. I think that really does have to be acknowledged. that we are sacrificing, a lot for this kaupapa of what we're trying to achieve. But I think that sacrifice is something that we're both incredibly passionate about doing for the betterment of our country and for the planet. But yeah, the structure of my life is when I'm home, I'm doing as much of the kid stuff that I can possibly can to give Rebecca a breather. And then when I'm away, obviously she's doing all that family mahi, all that whānau mahi. And at the same time, then also leaning very heavily on my business partner, Ewan, who, when I'm away fighting for the national kaupapa of electrification, he is the one that is making sure that the trees are all pruned, and that the blossoms are pollinated, and that the trees are protected from the frost, and that ultimately the right stuff goes on the cherries to create the best possible cherries that we can grow. And so this is all part of that process. Rachel, Ewan's wife, is a big part of our journey as well, who's the one that makes sure that every customer that we deliver our cherries to in New Zealand is a happy customer with lots of smiles. Because, when you're delivering fresh produce around New Zealand, occasionally things go wrong. So making sure that she handles all of that, and that's a super important part as well. So a lot of the time, I think, even in rewiring, I am seen as some sort of the poster child really of electrification of New Zealand now. But there's a team of 16 of us that are telling me essentially what to say. They're the ones that are telling me what to say and how to say it and where to be. And it's their mahi that ultimately I'm just the megaphone of. And I think that's the case of the cherries. That's the case of rewiring. And, to some extent, that's the case of my whānau as well. That you have to acknowledge the serious amount of work that goes into delivering on this. And none of this could have been achieved without all those people in my life. I think that's really important to always hold central to everything that I do.
And that's beautiful, because the sum of all actually makes us who we are. It's not just us on our own, is it? The other thing that I'm really curious about is for someone looking from the outside, they would say, okay, well, Mike has had a very good life where he has gone off, done all these things, ended up with a lot of money, and sure, he can go away and do all of this mahi because he's personally won somewhere and now he started again. And someone might be thinking, well, I'm not that person. I'm just a person who is struggling, and there's a lot of work that I'm trying to do. I'm not that fortunate. What would you say to them? And if they're starting their business journey right now, what would be the advice that you would give them?
The first thing is, I see you and I hear you. And I was you. Until I was 33 years old, I was someone that was struggling to figure out how to make it work. And at that point, at 33 years old, selling the business, I'm really proud of the fact that I have added a multiplier to the impact of the sale of that business. And not just to me and my family, but to so many other people in New Zealand. And hopefully to New Zealand as a whole by the time that we're done. There will be, I think that the most important thing is entrepreneurial advice is, if you roll the dice enough times, your numbers will eventually come up. Fortune favors the brave. Just keep going. And then what I'm trying to do at the moment with our latest kaupapa is, you don't have to build an electric cherry orchard to have a positive effect on our country, right? It starts with just getting gas out of the home the next time gas breaks. What we say to people is, I want you to make 6 good decisions in the next 10 years if you can. That is obviously that we've spoken about the way that you get around this beautiful country of ours. So that's either not having a car or electrifying the car that you do have. It's also getting gas out of the home. So gas out of your kitchen for cooking and gas out of the home for heating and hot water heating, and replacing those with electric options. Probably when the machine breaks. You don't have to rush out and do this tomorrow. This is not virtue signaling. This is, next time it breaks, make it electric. And then if you're in a privileged enough position, there's 2 new appliances that will eventually come to every home in New Zealand by the time I'm done, and that's solar on the roof and a battery in the garage, because that's the cheapest energy and the most resilient energy that the households of New Zealand are ever going to have. So 6 good decisions. That's what we need to do. At some point, your hot water system will break and you'll need to replace it. Choose the electric one over the gas one. Know that even though the electric one is a few $1,000s more expensive, it is tens of thousands of dollars cheaper for you over its lifetime, right? That's what I want you to know and understand. As you're further and further down this journey, you've electrified everything or close to electrifying everything in your life. Well, then I want you to electrify everyone in your life. And one of the most rewarding things for me is going to an event at a community hall or whatever, and having someone come up who 2 years ago said, "Oh, I saw you speak, and I've now got solar on my dairy shed," or we've just bought the electric vehicle. That's direct impact from something that I have done. But I'm only one person who's going to be really effective at talking to other middle-aged blokes about how to do this. I look at like my social media following, and it's like 75% of people are blokes between the age of 35 and 50. That's what I'm good at talking, who I'm good at talking to, right? But who is the best person to electrify a nurse? It's an electric nurse. Who's the best person to electrify a teacher? It's an electric teacher. Who's the best person to electrify the guy over the fence? It's you, his neighbor or her neighbor. Like, this is how we get this thing moving. So electrify everything and then electrify everyone. And if we do those things together, we'll have a very electric economy and we'll be tens of billions of dollars a year better off. We'll be so much more prosperous. And we'll smash about 25% of New Zealand's gross emissions by doing so. So you bundle that all up, and that is just an amazing. I'm getting tingles down my spine now just talking about it. I'm like, there's such a good opportunity on the horizon here for our people. Despite all of the doom and gloom and some of that stuff, we have to acknowledge there is a lot of risk going on with climate at the moment that we have to figure out how to solve. I'm very, very sympathetic, and I know a lot of people are going to, again, struggle with this argument. So hear me out. I'll buy safe space for a minute to explain what I'm saying here. I'm very sympathetic to the argument that New Zealand's emissions on a global scale will have very little effect if we wipe our emissions out. And so the saying there has always been, oh, yes, but everyone has to pull their weight and do their fair share. Okay, that is not a particularly good argument to sell to New Zealanders who are struggling. Oh, you've still got to lift your weight and do your fair share. But that's when climate appears to be a cost. Flip it on its head, and climate is actually an economic cost of living slam dunk. And we'll want to be the first in the world to do it. We will want to lead the world on it. I want Aotearoa, New Zealand, every time there's a lamb chop or some powdered milk sold overseas, people are like, oh yeah, that's from New Zealand. That's the country I want to buy from because they're leading the world on climate. And this is all entirely possible if we set that narrative right and get all the systems in place to make sure everyone, can electrify. The final thing to acknowledge is that there's 6 decisions to make over the next 10 years. That is for people who have mortgages and have homes. So one of the big things here is, how do we look after our renters? And so one of the things that I'm very proud of at the moment is the work that we're doing to change the systems and the rules around something called plug-in solar, which means a renter will be able to go down to Mitre 10, buy a solar panel for a few $100, come back home, plug it into a normal wall socket, point it at the sun, and immediately start saving money. And of course, pick that solar panel up and take it with them to their next property should they end up moving. I think that's a remarkable outcome, and hopefully something that is going to get legalized this year or going to plan.
Well, that last one is very exciting. I think if I think about my dad, who did the solar project about 15 years ago in our family home, had he known this option was coming, he would have been amazingly excited, because I remember back then it wasn't as easy. So all of us got together. We had to literally go through all of these trying to figure out. Luckily, my brother is actually an engineer he doesn't actually practice as an engineer, but he was studying that in his past history. And so we ended up figuring it out all by ourselves. But all of the options that we have right now, it's very exciting. I'm feeling the excitement right down.
What an amazing whānau project. And now you know so much more about solar and all of the things, right? This is part of electrifying everyone. Go your father.
Exactly, right? It was quite exciting. And I think that's kind of what led me to, from there on, buying that original blue leaf that was out that could only go to 100K. And then, I bought the first 2 secondhand, which was quite a good decision. And then, that next one, buying that. And I feel like it's just a little tiny portion of what you're doing, but I get very excited that it's going to get easier and easier for the next generation of electrification. It's going to get cheaper, easier, and it's just, I'm just very excited about what's coming.
And I think when you think about it as well, if you do look back, there's probably a number of electric decisions from your friends that have been made as a direct result of you doing this. And that's what this is all about. It's the network effect. And I'm just so proud of New Zealand
100%.
for how far we've come and how many people are electrifying now because all of their friends told them that it's a good idea, you know?
Before we go and before I leave you, I have a question for you that I always ask all our guests. For you personally, Mike, what are the 3 values that you live by, and why do you choose those 3 as your values?
It's a really interesting question because I spend so much time focusing on purpose. I haven't really, I don't think, actually defined my values are. I think one of my values is definitely to be a good father and a good husband and a good family man. I think one of my values is definitely authenticity. I'm pretty certain we can call that a value. It's not really cloaking myself in a way that I think other people would like to receive me. It's really being uniquely me. Some people are going to love me, and some people are not. And finally, probably the other thing is acknowledging that I do have a large level of privilege from having a good childhood, obviously from being a white bloke in New Zealand, but ultimately making sure that that privilege is used to lift the whole of our country up. And also maybe if I can squeeze a fourth one in there, it's using that privilege to help lift other individuals up as well. I think that's a super, important part of understanding that this, that things in life can be a little bit unfair from time to time. And where things are falling in my court, to make sure that I am able to, also fill other people's buckets as well, I guess is a big part of what I believe in. So yeah, that's probably another reason that'll probably still define, helps define why I have the purpose that I have.
Thank you so much, Mike. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've shared so much today, and I hope that you continue on your journey and there's more and more good that comes out of all the work that you do. And I know all of the New Zealanders watching today and also in the future would definitely say the same, that you've contributed so much, and thank you for all the mahi that you're doing and your team.
I just want to thank you as well, because you're platforming me to a bunch of New Zealanders that may not have heard my story or my kaupapa yet, and so thank you for spreading the kaupapa further and wider to more people. I thoroughly appreciate that, and I hope we get a chance to have a yarn again soon.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and got as much out of it as I did. As always, if this episode speaks to you, please like, share, and subscribe to Care Beyond Profits. I appreciate you, and until next time, keep caring beyond profits.